I've known Peggy since first grade. She was shy and reserved, but extremely intelligent. She lived 6 blocks from me in our small town. When we started high school, I would go to her house every morning so we could start our day together. Our mutual love for classical music brought us together at an early age. She played the violin and I played the piano. By the time we went to high school, I could also play the guitar quite well. We played many duets together. She was especially fond of Paganini, and of course, like Paganini's friend Lignani, I ended up accompanying him on acoustic guitar. Not that I minded, this was my chance to be close to her. I considered myself a decent pianist, and she especially enjoyed hearing me play Chopin. I was literally on the wrong side of the tracks. My father was a working-class man, and the upper crust of the town where Peggy lived despised our social class. As the eldest of 4 children, I had a lot to do around the house, so I was unable to participate in organized school sports. It's not like my body was suffering to help my father put a lot of muscle on me. Peggy had a beautiful, athletic body, and by her senior year, she became a cheerleader for our high school football team. My enemy was Mark, the team's defender, the son of the biggest banker in the city. He was in his senior year, a year ahead of us, when he began to pay attention to Peggy. He was popular, and all the girls fawned over him. The selfish bastard definitely had his fair share of sex. On the contrary, I was a virgin. It was a fateful spring Saturday when I stopped by Peggy's house. Her parents were away for the weekend, and I thought we could go to the movies. As I was about to knock, I heard groans and squeals coming from inside. As I slowly opened the door, I witnessed something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Peggy had wild sex with Mark. It was the most terrible shock of my young life. It was as if the love of my life suddenly died, and I never had a chance to say goodbye. The innocent girl I hoped to marry after graduation had disappeared. I quietly closed the door and left. When I came home, I sat behind my father's barn and mourned my loss. Cried for hours. My father found me and assessed the situation with one glance at my face. "Son," he said, sitting down next to me, "trust me, I know exactly how you feel. When your mother fell ill many years ago, I thought my life was ending. She was everything to me my whole life. But even though there was a high probability that she would not survive, I found enough inner strength that we both could continue to go. You too, Matt," he continued. "Peggy is making a mistake, a young girl's mistake, but if you'll be patient." I saw them, together doing it. I choked back a sob. He shook his head with a sad expression on his face. "A few days ago, I saw her and Mark walking hand in hand. Someday she will understand her mistake." "No, Dad, there's no going back," I said, my anger growing. But I knew that wasn't what I felt. I desperately wanted things to be the way they were before. Monday morning was the first time I didn't go to Peggy's house to take her to school. I avoided her all day. If I saw her coming, I would duck into a doorway or into a closet, or turn and quickly walk in the other direction. On the 3rd day of school, she cornered me. "Matt, I'm so sorry," she apologized. "I should have told you about my date with Mark." "I saw you having sex on the living room carpet," I blurted out. Her face turned red and her eyes looked at my shoes. "I'm so sorry you saw that," she muttered. "Mark and I fell in love. Please don't hate me, Matt. You and I have been close friends for so long, it would hurt me terribly if you—" I walked past her and left, unable to listen any longer. After that, Peggy and I saw each other a little, and when we did, we both treated each other coolly. Her ringing laughter and our good-natured hugs disappeared. She started dating Mark exclusively, even though the bastard slept with others too. I couldn't tell her this. She wouldn't believe me anyway. She was in love with this idiot. When Mark graduated, he went to university in a city 200 miles away. Peggy and I were in our senior year of high school. We met from time to time, but only for platonic purposes. She never let me touch her, except for one occasion. On prom night, I managed to slide my fingers past her panties. My interest in mathematics and music led me to computer programming during my senior year of high school. At that time, computers were in their infancy, and there were no high school courses, so I studied on my own. Assembly language was the norm and compilers were primitive. I didn't have enough money to go to university, so that summer I took a job at a small company that was trying to develop some business computer applications. Looking back, it was easy to find a job as a programmer back then. It seemed that anyone who wore a pair of sandals and knew what a subroutine was could get a job, albeit with low pay. At the end of the summer, Peggy went to study at the university, and not coincidentally, the same one where Mark studied. I only saw her once during the Christmas holidays. She ignored me. Gone was that clean, washed look. She now wore a ton of makeup and dressed like an approachable girl. I guess Mark liked it. Meanwhile, I lost my virginity to Marion. She really liked me in high school, so it seemed natural that we would meet. She absolutely loved it and said that I was the best she had ever had. However, I soon discovered that I was not the only one. After that, I wasn't too picky about who I dated. Peggy dropped out of her first year. She became Mark's party girl and neglected her studies, skipping most of her classes. It pained her parents to realize that their only child was a failure, so her father helped her get into business by buying her the only music store in our city. Everything went very well, but Peggy spent more than she earned. With her designer clothes, fancy red sports car, and many other expensive habits, she soon had to. I had to borrow money from the bank to stay afloat. This bank belonged to Mark's father. She could barely contain her spending to pay the interest on the loan. She didn't last long before she had to take out another loan, using her record store as collateral. Mark is back for the summer, working at his father's bank. This time he rented an apartment. Peggy wanted to move in with him, but it would limit his freedom, so he refused. When he went back to university in the fall, Peggy began visiting him almost every weekend. These trips gradually became less frequent because he claimed that he needed more time to study. Yes, of course. Mark was Peggy's biggest fan. She subscribed to the city newspaper and the university magazine and kept a scrapbook of his clippings. Although it hurt her to see him in photographs with other women, her love for him never faded. Was it love? I doubted it. This arrogant bastard just happened to be the first one to get into her pants. For me, after a year of trying to fix someone else's messed up code, I rebelled. Trying to add more documentation and structure to my boss's business programs was futile. Because it added time to our projects, I was looked at as some kind of nut. So I quit and joined a big company that welcomed my ideas. This meant that our programs could be more easily adapted to the needs of other clients. Within a few months, I found another person with the same mindset as me, and we started our company. The quality of our work set us apart from others, and we immediately became successful. Over the course of the year, we employed a dozen more programmers. Money flowed like a river. Since I was so busy growing our company, I had little time for social activities. I only met Peggy a few times that year, but we hardly spoke. By this time, I had moved into my own small apartment. Since none of my younger siblings were interested in playing the piano, my father allowed me to take an old piano. It was my solace, my escape from the busy world of business management and programming. One day, I was passing by Peggy's music store and decided to go in and buy some sheet music. The store was divided into two parts. One side sold vinyl records, and the other sold musical instruments. There was a demo grand piano on the floor, and I couldn't resist. I've never had to play one like this. I stretched my fingers and started playing a Chopin nocturne. I was so engrossed in the sound of that piano that I didn't notice Peggy come up and stand next to me until I had finished. When I looked up, she had tears in her eyes. It was so beautiful, Matt. She sat down next to me on the piano bench and rested her head on my shoulder. People around us began to applaud. I later learned that my performance sold 2 pianos that day. That bastard Mark was now dating the elite of his university, and Peggy no longer had the opportunity to see him often. I took advantage of the situation, and we started dating again. I took her to restaurants and dances, and the old Peggy slowly came back. That wonderful laugh, the warm hugs, our shared passion for music. Everything seemed to come back. I was truly in love again. To tell the truth, I have always been in love with her. Peggy appreciated my company, but it wasn't enough for me. I couldn't be number two. I had to possess her, make her my woman exclusively. This opportunity presented itself one day when her parents were away for the weekend. We sat in her living room listening to a recording of Joshua Heifetz performing Tchaikovsky's violin concerto in D major, probably one of the most complex and intense works for violin ever written. Our arms were wrapped around each other. Her head lay on my chest, lost in the melody. When the work ended, it seemed as if there should have been a continuation, as if the story had no ending. I lifted her face to mine and kissed her softly on the lips, as if trying to complete the story. It was obvious that the music had touched her too. There were tears in her eyes, and I knew why. We had a synergy when it came to music that she had never experienced with Mark. He never understood anything other than primitive rhythms. When I tried to get up to change the record, she refused to let me go. She pressed her lips firmly to mine, as if to acknowledge my presence. We had sex, and during this, she called me Mark. After a moment, her eyes opened. "Matt, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it." But I knew what she wanted. She was fantasizing about Mark having sex with her. But I loved her and wasn't going to give up. When we made love after that, she never called me Mark again, but she didn't call me Matt either. Instead, she used affectionate nicknames such as Sweetheart or Love. This did not deceive me. She continued to keep her eyes closed so as not to see my face while we made love. However, our sex was great. I decided it was time to take our relationship to the next level. We were best friends and both really enjoyed sex. The only drawback was her fantasy about Mark, but I believed that with time this problem would be solved. I asked her to marry me, but she refused, so I decided to make her a child. I pierced all my condoms, and after 3 months it happened. She was devastated to learn this and wanted to have an abortion. I firmly refused to let this happen, promising that I would ruin her life if she chose this option. After talking with her parents, she agreed to marry me and have a child. The wedding was very small. I was surprised because Peggy was the only child of a very wealthy family. I soon realized that her father had something to do with this. After the ceremony, the wedding party dined in a small, secluded room at the luxurious restaurant. As we prepared to leave, I cornered her father and told him bluntly that I would not tolerate any interference in our marriage. He simply laughed and waved his hand. Then I realized that she was planning to divorce me after the birth of the child. Why? So she can marry Mark when he returns to run his father's bank. Of course I was angry, but I refused to play this game and continued as if I did not suspect anything. Peggy's pregnancy caused hormonal changes. Now she wanted to make love every day, twice a day on weekends. But the scenario remained the same. She closed her eyes tightly when I had sex with her. When our son was born, she wanted to name him Marcus. I frowned but didn't say anything. When we left the hospital, I wrote my father's name, Jonathan, on the birth certificate. Later, when she found out what I had done, she almost ripped my head off. It took Peggy 2 months to recover enough to have sex, but her hormones changed again. Now she rarely wants sex. She gained 20 extra pounds during her pregnancy and made no effort to lose them. I was a little disappointed, but at the same time I knew she wouldn't be attractive to that bastard Mark. This was a comfort to me. During his senior year, Mark returned for a few days during Thanksgiving. I kept a close eye on Peggy. They only met once for lunch. After his return, Peggy became much more interested in my exercise equipment. Over the next 6 months, she worked hard to lose the excess weight. Her body looked even better than it did before pregnancy, although her butt was a little bigger and her breasts were a little bigger. I wouldn't have much to complain about. Then disaster struck for Peggy. As soon as Mark graduated from the university, he married a rich student from the same university. The wedding took place in the bride's city. Peggy was devastated and wasn't even invited to the wedding. Our sexual encounters became more frequent, but I knew that she still fantasized about Mark making love to her. She often cried after we finished. She just couldn't let him go. Mark's marriage lasted only 6 months before his wife caught him with another woman. A few months later, This cocky bastard returned to work at his father's bank as a senior loan manager. The news of his return caused me concern. I was sure that Peggy would want to renew her relationship with him. One morning she dressed in a provocative short skirt, a low-cut silk blouse, and stiletto heels. I sat on a chair near her dressing table while she applied her makeup. I asked the question directly, "Peggy, are you planning to divorce me? Or do you think you can have an affair with Mark behind my back?" She dodged the question. "Silly boy, I'm just dressing for work." "You never dress like this for work." She blushed a little, then ran downstairs to leave. She grabbed her purse from the kitchen table while I blocked the exit at the front door. She stubbornly reached for the doorknob. "I love you very much, Peggy. Please don't do this. I won't share you with another man." She walked past me and ran out to her car. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself more coffee, and thought about my life with Peggy. She was my wife, my whole life. To Mark, she was just another woman. Could I just sit idly by while this bastard ruined my marriage? No way, because I was supposed to be Peggy's protector. An hour later, I called the office and told her I was taking the day off, then drove to her record store and parked on the hill about a block away. Of course, Mark showed up at the store at noon, and they went to a nearby restaurant. I sat there for a while, contemplating what to do, then decided to go straight ahead and try to ruin their meeting before it happened. I went to the restaurant and found them on the back patio drinking and laughing at something Mark said. I approached their table. "I decided to come and have lunch with my sexy wife today." I smiled tightly. Peggy stared at her hands folded in her lap. "Hey," the cocky bastard spoke up. "You're late. We agreed on this lunch yesterday." "Is it true, Peggy?" She nodded without looking up. I left, but didn't stop there. When they left the restaurant an hour later, he got into his BMW and she followed him in your sports car. I was pretty sure where they were going and followed them a block behind. When they arrived at his house, they ran to the door. He pulled her in and she hugged him, kissing him on the lips. I rushed to the back of his house, hoping I could enter through the patio. I'm lucky. I didn't know what to expect from watching their meeting, but I knew that I would kill him with my bare hands if he touched my wife. Standing in the shadows in the kitchen, I watched as she satisfied him. "I love you, Peggy. Please don't do this." I whispered to myself, my whole world hanging by a thread. "Too late, married or not, you're still the best bitch I've ever known." Peggy froze. "Come on, Peggy, I don't have much time." The smug bastard was starting to get impatient. "I'll make you another baby. You can call him Marcus." The words froze her, and she pushed him away, her face contorted in pain. She started crying. "Do you know that every time he had sex with me, I pretended it was you? Do you know that I never told him that I loved him? It was always you." "Of course, Peggy, I taught you all these things, and you enjoyed every minute of it. Mark, I've loved you for so many years, but you just proved that I was just a convenient fuck toy for you." She wiped away her tears with the back of her hand, then picked up her purse and headed for the door. He laughed. "Come back here, bitch. If you don't have sex with me right now, I'll cancel your loan. Your father won't help you, so you'll be broke before tomorrow morning." Now she was crying. "Lord, what have I done?" She turned to him. "I don't care. Take everything I have. This is a small price to pay for the way I treated my husband." She ran out of the house as I retreated through the patio doors. I heard them yelling at each other, but I couldn't make out the words from behind the back of the house. As I turned the corner, I saw her red sports car pull away from the curb. The feeling of relief was incredible. I went home and waited. An hour later, Peggy still had not appeared. I called her employee at the store, but no one had seen her. I was starting to panic and decided to drive past Mark's house. There were no cars there. Had she changed her mind and met him somewhere else? Did she see me? I urgently needed a drink, so I stopped at a local bar. Two old friends, Bill and Greg, were sitting at the table, and I joined them. Bill sat with his head down, his eyes red and puffy. "What's happened?" I asked. Bill looked up at me. These last 2 days have been the worst of my life. That bastard Mark came to our house yesterday morning and threatened my wife that if she didn't sleep with him, he would take our house. He didn't care that she was scared to death. He just had sex with her. When I got home last night, Sandra was almost hysterical. When I finally got her to tell me what happened, I couldn't believe she let it happen. I screamed and yelled at her, then left the house and spent the night in a motel. This morning, I calmed down and returned home. He cried. I found her in the bathtub. Oh God. She cut her hands. She barely had a pulse before I got her to the hospital. They gave her enough plasma to stabilize her, but she's still in intensive care. I will never forgive myself because this woman is my whole life. Greg looked at me. This bastard thinks this whole town is his personal playground. His goal seems to be to sleep with every woman here. You knew that he even impregnated Candace Norris, the 30-year-old daughter of the police chief. Come on, I asked insistently. This happened over a year ago, Greg continued. He courted her for a while, took her to bed, and made her a child, apologizing that he could not marry her while he was in college, hinting that he would marry her after finishing. Of course, he married someone else, but now that he is divorced, the Norris family is trying to squeeze him. It didn't work. Candace stayed with his child and lives with her parents. Her father, Harper Norris, is trying to pin that bastard down. Well, I'll spare him the trouble. Bill's face turned red with anger. I'll go right now and cut something off this bastard. Stop, I warned him. If you physically harm Mark, the police will be forced to arrest you for assault. Who will take care of Sandra while you're in prison? No, I have a much better idea. We will make sure that he can never appear in this city again. I laid out my plan. Bill didn't think it was harsh enough, but he finally agreed. Greg went and brought a couple of available women. Jen was white and Tiffany was black, both middle-aged, around 30. We snuck into Mark's house through the back patio door, and the girls waited in the bedroom. When Mark entered the house, Greg and Bill grabbed him and handcuffed him behind his back, then sat him in a chair across from me. What the hell is going on here? Mark shouted. Everything will be explained in due time, I replied, cleaning my nails with a long, sharp knife. But first I want to ask you a few questions. Huh. The cocky bastard chuckled. The answer to the first question is jail time for you and these guys. Unlawful entry, forcible confinement, threat of assault with a weapon. The police chief will shut you all down for interfering with his son-in-law's future. So are you going to marry Candace? Ha ha, at least that's what she thinks. But no, I'm just adding her to my harem. Are there already a few in your arsenal? I smiled, knowing that my hidden tape recorder was recording it all. Hell yeah, just need to add a good bitch. I guess that's why you're stalking Peggy, I suggested. Mark hesitated for a moment before throwing caution to the wind. Aptitude for the wind. Yes, it takes time to train a good bitch. Oh yeah, I finally spoke. Peggy is one of the reasons we are here today. You see, she keeps a scrapbook of you, and I thought it would be fun to add some new photos. You know, Bill is very angry about what you did to Sandra. There was real concern on Mark's face. He never thought that Sandra would tell Bill what happened. He wants to hurt you badly, I continued, but I convinced him to give you two options. First, I'll give him this knife, and he'll cut off what's between your legs while I take photos. Don't worry, we'll all have a solid alibi, and I doubt the police chief won't be too energetic about us stalking when he hears the recording I'm making about what you have planned for his daughter Candace. Your second choice is to let me photograph you having sex with several available girls for Peggy's album. Ah, I knew you'd take the second option. Now swallow these pills. Greg, please take the girls. I took my 35mm SLR camera and loaded it with a 36-frame roll of film. The girls entered naked, except for garters and thigh-high stockings. They started working on it, and I took some standard shots. Okay, here's the deal. Tomorrow morning, you will go to your bank and cancel all your deprivations. You will call your father and resign. And then, as in Western films, you will leave the city before sunset as far as possible. Otherwise, your photos will become public, and I will give this knife to Bill. Thinking about it, if your father finds out what you did, I might have to buy him one of these too. I got up to leave. When I got home, Peggy was sitting cross-legged in front of the fireplace in her robe, tearing pages out of her sketchbook and throwing them into the fire. When I asked, she said she was just getting rid of trash. I felt especially dirty after the incident with Mark, so I walked past her to take a shower. She was still tearing pages out of her sketchbook when I returned. I sat down on the floor a few feet away from her and leaned against the couch, waiting for her to tell me what happened that afternoon. There was a catch in her voice, and she still wasn't looking at me as she began her explanation. Matt, I've been driving around town for hours, trying to piece together my miserable life. When I married you, I had no intention of remaining your wife. I was going to divorce you after the birth of the child and marry Mark. I know all that, I answered calmly. What you don't know is that I went to his place this afternoon to sleep with him. Then I heard a voice. It seemed to come from the depths of my soul. He said, I love you, Peggy. Please don't do this. Suddenly, everything became crystal clear. At that moment, I saw everything. I saw myself as I really am, a selfish bitch, another man's bitch. Your face flashed before me, the face of my kind, caring husband. You have always been my best friend. When I was sick, you took care of me. When I was depressed, you comforted me. When I had problems, you helped me. When I gave birth to Johnny, you held my hand in the delivery room. And how did I thank you? You have become my fuck toy. When we made love, I closed my eyes and imagined that it was Mark. Matt, I'm so ashamed of myself, I can't meet you. Peggy. Don't call me Peggy, she shouted back at me. Call me by the right name. Pig. That's what Mark always called me. She was on the verge of hysterics, and I had to calm her down. Okay, Pig, I think we can solve this problem. Matt, didn't you hear me? Pig. Mark will be leaving town soon, so you'll need another person for sex. I grinned. And I'm available. What? After everything I've done, do you still want me? We started making love. My life with Peggy became utopian. She took Johnny to work with her almost every day. I would often visit him and watch her dance around the store while she held him in her arms, humming and humming softly. She looked very happy, but she was missing a lot. There was only Johnny and me in her life. She avoided her former friends and hung up when her parents called her. If they came to a record store, she would take Johnny to her office and lock the door. It was an unhealthy situation. Her parents talked to me several times and asked if there was any way I could convince Peggy to meet with them. One Sunday, I invited them to come. Peggy was closest to the door when they arrived, and when she opened it and saw who it was, she immediately slammed it in their faces. There was a murmur from the other side. Her mother was crying. Please come in, I insisted, opening the door. No, Peggy screamed. I don't want to see them. It's time to heal, Peggy. Please, let's all go into the living room and sit down. Peggy held little Johnny to her shoulder, rocked him, and looked blankly at her parents, sitting on the couch across the room. Peggy, we need to talk about this problem. I insisted. You don't know the half of it, Peggy snapped. They are the problem. Ever since we were in high school, they've been trying to keep us apart. You weren't good enough for me. They constantly pushed me. Dating socially acceptable guys in this city. They even got me my first date with Mark, she sobbed. That rotten son of a bitch. He took my virginity, and I thought I fell in love with him. My parents were so happy they had a banker as a son-in-law, although he had other girls. When you got me pregnant, they promised to pay for my divorce after the baby was born, and if Mark didn't want the baby, they would raise him themselves. To add insult to injury, they made sure I got married outside the sight of this city's elite. My marriage to you was so tasteless that it became the town's joke. All their friends knew that my marriage was only temporary. Their smirks and snide remarks never let me forget it. And I also convinced myself that our marriage was short-term. I was such a naive, selfish bitch. The right man was mine all the time, and I never appreciated him. Her mother was crying too. We very much regret our intervention. We want our daughter and grandson in our lives. If you ever forgive us, we want to make amends. I looked at them. The solution was right in front of them. Could they see it? Her father was quite perceptive. Peggy, please let us make amends. We want you to remarry Matt, which is sort of a renewal of your vows. This is going to be the biggest damn wedding this town has ever seen. Then we'll pay for your honeymoon anywhere. We'll take care of little Johnny while you're gone, and I promise you, we'll give him more love than you could ever imagine. Peggy was confused, looking at me with wide eyes. I just smiled and nodded. After several minutes of awkward silence, her mother held out her hands. Can I hold him? Peggy hesitated, then stood up and walked over to her mother, taking Johnny in her arms. She grabbed my hand and dragged me into our bedroom, throwing me down next to her on the bed. She buried her face in my shoulder, crying out her shame and grief until her body pressed against mine. I can't do this, Matt. Everyone in town knows I was Mark's toy. You have to do it, Peggy. You can't live the rest of your life hiding in the shadows. I don't care about me. I was a bitch, and I deserve what people think of me. I care about you. How will you feel when you hear the whole church giggle when we take our vows, when you kiss me in front of the minister to seal our allegiance? They will roll down the aisles and laugh until they drop. No, that won't happen, I promised. They will see a very strong woman who loves her husband and child, and they will see a man who is completely dedicated to taking care of his family. Be strong, Peggy. Please do this for me. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed loudly. I can't, Matt. You'll be humiliated. I can't let people laugh at the man I love. Please, Peggy, can't you see that this is just as important to me as it is to you? In their eyes, I carefully wiped her face with a napkin. Her eyes never left mine. There was love in them, I knew. Thank you for your understanding, Matt. You know, my dear, it hardly seems possible, but I love you more every day. I am so proud to be your wife. The remarriage was scheduled for July, 4 months later. The other 5 members of her high school cheerleading squad were invited as bridesmaids. They were all studying at university or just graduating, all in very good shape. Of the 5 people, 1 was married, 2 were engaged. Peggy's father invited guests, most of the city's intellectuals, and, of course, my parents and brothers and sisters. Peggy didn't care who was there. She was angry at the way she was treated by these people. The only ones she insisted on inviting were Marion and her bitch friends. It was a problem. I knew she was up to something. The wedding took place outdoors on their huge estate and then moved into the reception. As the evening wore on, the party became a bit loose and most of the elderly and infirm guests left. Less than half the guests remained, but still more than 100 people. My sisters also left. They had other plans for the evening. My little brother, Evan, stayed behind and flirted with 2 single ex-cheerleaders. They were a year younger than Peggy at school and a year older than Evan. The girls were both finishing their 3rd year of university, and Evan had completed his 2nd year of engineering. At 6 o'clock in the evening, my jaw dropped. Peggy and the bridesmaids left the house wearing only thongs and crop tops and high heels. Peggy came over and hugged me, kissing me passionately. Meet your new wife, she giggled, pirouetting in front of me. Nice ass, I croaked. I want these men to imagine what it's like to own that ass. Now I want you to take me upstairs and have sex. We went upstairs and made love in one of the many spare bedrooms. I don't remember a time when I was more excited. More? I asked. No, or we'll be here all night. I promise to finish with you later. Before sunset, Peggy and the other 5 former cheerleaders lined up at the edge of the pool, signaling for everyone to move away. All from the pool. Only us 6 girls will be in it. No one dares to join us except the groom. Okay, girls, take off your tops. They took off their tops and threw them over their shoulders into the pool. Now underwear. Peggy swam towards me to the edge of the pool. Okay, love, take off your clothes and jump. Right now. Peggy, I don't think. This party is for you, Matt. Please, dear, do as I ask. When we returned, all the young couples had already left. The 3 married bridesmaids and their men thanked us and said goodbye, then called a taxi and left for their hotel. Most of the remaining couples were middle-aged. Many husbands drank heavily and fell asleep. The others were in the living room, having fun with Marion and her friends. The next morning, we made love again and had a late breakfast before heading back to Peggy's parents to get Johnny back before heading off on our honeymoon. The cleaners and gardeners were just finishing up. Our twin daughters, Cynthia and Caroline, were conceived on our honeymoon and named after our mothers. As for the rest, Sandra and Bill now have 4 children. They own a combined gas station and a restaurant opened with seed money from the bank. Business is going very well. Bill is an excellent mechanic and Sandra is an excellent cook. 2 of the engaged bridesmaids got married within a year. This is not surprising since they were already planning to do this after graduation. We attended their weddings, and now these 3 couples are our closest friends. Evan graduated from engineering school, and although these 2 lonely former fans continue to vie for his attention, he is still playing on the field. I only see Greg occasionally when I go to that watering hole for a beer. Apparently, he opened an escort service and moved in with Ian and Tiff. He also recruited Marion and her 2 friends. Mark left town and was never seen again. Some believed that he was too embarrassed to show his face, others that he seemed upset and bitter and never wanted to interact with any of the local residents of the city. Mark's father was prohibited from visiting his grandson, so he persuaded Candace and her son to live with him. Within a few months they got married, and a year later she gave him a son. Now his family includes a son and grandson. End.